Elliot, how you doing?
I'm good, Gary. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, mate. I feel like I've stalked you for long enough now. Finally,
You have.
But
That's why I'm here.
you're my proof that persistence pays off.
It does. Aye.
You've got to keep checking in with people and making sure they've not forgot about you. Your story's obviously different because it's not a career as such. Well, it is a career as such, but not a career that you would hear people talk about a lot of the time. You have had your documentary that came out on BBC, Confessions of a Teenage Fraudster. For people who don't know, people who haven't seen it, tell us a little bit about what the documentary was based on, and then we'll go into some questions and things off the back of it.
So basically, the documentary covers a period of my life from the age of about roughly 16 to 21, say there or thereabouts, when I was involved in fraud, which basically escalated from small stuff to quite big stuff.
Yep.
And in the end, I mean, it's hard for me to say exactly how much I was guilty of taking from banks and stuff, but it looked, I mean, the sort of figures that have been bandied about by various different authorities is anywhere between about £1.5 to £2.5 million.
And does that feel right? Like, would you say based rough estimate?
It sounds mental, but I mean, it's when you think about the value of some of the stuff that I was buying, you can see how it could easily rack up pretty quickly. I mean, certainly it didn't start off that way. It was kind of very basic stuff that I was buying at the start, but it did get to a point where it was kind of luxury items and first class flights instead of standard class flights and so on and so forth.
How did it start? Where was the kind of the root cause? Where did it all kind of begin from your point of view?
Well, as I say, I was about 15 or so, roughly. I was still at school at the time. I had a very kind of tumultuous school life. I went to 8 different schools, which is pretty mental considering most people go to 2.
Yeah.
But I just had various issues with teachers and getting on with other kids my own age and stuff like that. So just it went from one school to the next, to the next, to the next. And eventually, the school I was in at the time, it wasn't a traditional school. Basically, it was run by a charity called Quarriers, and they had kind of sort of come to my rescue sort of thing because I did so many issues with the education department. And I don't know how different it is nowadays, but at the time, it wasn't really something that if you just didn't get on at school, you were just labelled a bad kid, you know, or just troublesome or whatever the particular adjective of the day was. So they put me in a school which was up in a place called Fairley near Largs. I say school, it wasn't really a school, it was a residential unit, if you like. So it was a house, basically just an ex-council house that had been bought by the charity, and I was there with usually 2, sometimes 3 other boys, just depending on who was there at the time. And it was run by residential social workers who worked for the charity, and that was the last kind of school that I went to, if you like. So the first time that I can remember anything happening, I mean, it was certainly the first time that anything to do with cards or anything happened, that's for sure. I was on my way up there. So the deal was I would go up on the Monday and come back on the Friday. So every week I would have money that they would give me to buy my ticket to go up to school and stuff. But this particular journey, somebody had dropped a credit card on the train, or it had fallen out of their wallet, or whatever happened. And I saw it and I picked it up. And obviously I was aware of credit cards. I mean, I knew what they did. I'd seen my parents using them and stuff like that. So I knew you could buy stuff with it. And I mean, honestly, it's not like I had this like great idea to do this. It was just something that like off the cuff happened where I picked up the card. I thought, right, okay, if I use this card to buy my ticket, it means I can keep the money and use it for something else. Probably sweets or some other shit that teenagers buy, who knows. So that's what happened. So the guy came round to check tickets, and I had a season ticket thing. So basically a photo card inside a wallet with my name on it. And just didn't really even think about it, just passed the card over, signed, and the guy went away. And that was, as far as I was concerned, that was the end of it. And I was like, wow, that was easy. But the train came to a standstill about 2 or 3 stations later, and then didn't move. I was like, right, okay, still didn't think about what was going on. So we were there for about maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes or something like that. It wasn't too long. and then a male and female cop came on the train,
Right.
and asked if they could have a word with me. So they took me off the train and said, right, you know, what's this card? Blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, the first thing I thought of was, well, it's my friend's card. They've told me I can use it. So they radioed in with the card details and stuff. And unfortunately for me, whoever dropped the card had already reported it lost.
Right, okay.
So, so they were like, you're not being totally truthful with us here, are you? And anyway, so what happened that time, because I was only 15, they took me to the school and had a word with the senior social worker, Fiona, that was there at the time. She was not happy. I mean, you know, see in fairness to these people, they really did try to help, you know. But I was just away with the fairies at that point in my life. So anyway, so that was the first occasion. So I guess I got caught the very first time I did it, basically, you know. But what it had done is it sort of, I guess it's just shown me that just by signing someone's name, you could buy something, you know. So that was that's what kind of opened the floodgates, if you like.
And it didn't. I take it there wasn't even a fear factor there from getting caught, and the point of, oh shit, I can't do that again.
Not the first time.
Right.
No, certainly not the first time. I mean, that was the fear of getting caught was something that always kind of lingered in the background.
Yeah.
But for a long time, I mean, if I'm totally truthful, I didn't believe I would ever be caught.
Jeez.
Yeah. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, there were flashes of, you know, paranoia. In fact, that was a constant theme throughout that whole 5 or 5.5 year period or whatever it was, of just always feeling a bit paranoid about, well, everything really, you know. I mean, to put it bluntly, I mean, my whole life at that point in time was a lie.
Yeah.
To the majority of people that I met, other than perhaps parents and members of the family and stuff, you know.
And see for that point with the initial, obviously the finding the card on the train and you've tried it and you get caught. When was the kind of point for you when it moved from that to I can make money out of this?
So I think, I mean, it did escalate over a period of time. I mean, there were certain key moments where discoveries were made by myself that, you know, this is a better way of doing it. Because, I mean, although it's criminal activity, you know, you know, if you're always trying to find a better way, I suppose, of doing something. Yeah. So where it kind of, I think, went a bit mental, really. Well, there's a few points, but the first one would be after I left that school. I was 16 at that point, and I basically went and applied for a job in a call centre, doing mobile phones. Okay. So this was in Glasgow city centre. Just to kind of set the scene a wee bit, you know, we're talking late 90s here, so you know, this was a kind of time where it was like a boom for mobile phones. Like, you know, I mean, they weren't brand new, but they were becoming more affordable and smaller, so you know, they were more accessible to the majority of people. So essentially, I lied about my age. I told them I was 18 because obviously you had to be 18 to work there. Checks on ID and things like that were a bit different back then, and obviously now there's a lot more rules and regulations about employment and stuff like that, so a lot of that wasn't in place at the time, so I got away with it and I looked 18 probably. So I got the job, and I again didn't get the job with any particular motive in mind except for to have a job and make money. But people were phoning in, so it was inbound sales. Right. So you had people phoning in both from like personal customers and business customers looking to get phones, contracts for their family or their business or whatever it was. And quite often, if they were buying a phone, they would have to pay for the phone or make a payment towards it or whatever. So they would be giving card details over the phone. Right. And I think maybe it wasn't. I mean, I wasn't there that long. We're talking like maybe a month or two maximum. But at one point, I just thought, you know, maybe there's some way you could use this information. So when the customers were phoning in, instead of just sort of processing the payment as normal, I started taking notes of their details. And then when it would get to the point of payment, I would say, right, could you just hold the line for a minute? And I would go away and come back to the phone, or I didn't really go anywhere, obviously, I just kind of pressed the button. And I would ask them, I would say, look, you know, I'm really sorry about this, but your bank are on the line, and they're just asking some security questions before they authorise the transaction. So that had come about just from observations that I'd made, because at the time it was different to like nowadays. Gary, you tap your card and that's it.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
sometimes if it's over £100, you might need to put it in, or if it's been tapped a certain number of times, you need to put it in and put your PIN number in.
Yeah.
But back in the late 90s, there wasn't chip and PIN. I mean, that only arrived in about 2004. So this was signatures only, basically. But what I'd seen in shops when I'd been in shops myself, or just anywhere where cards could be used, was that sometimes the transaction would be temporarily stopped. And whoever the shop assistant was would have to call a number that was on their terminal and ask the customer questions that they had been given to ask by the bank at the other end of the line. So I was aware that these security questions would be something that could help in terms of avoiding any problems with those checks. Excuse me. So part of the process that I went through was asking them things like their mother's maiden name and date of birth and phone numbers and just whatever questions I could think of that I'd heard being asked.
Yeah.
And then eventually I came away with a notebook. So what happened, I got fired from the job.
It was nothing to do with the actual details, etc. Was it you were let go for something like completely different?
Yeah, so I turned up late one too many times.
Right, okay.
And this one day I turned up and I was like probably 5 minutes late or something, whatever. And I got called into a meeting with HR and I was like, oh my God, I hope they've not found anything or... but they just like said, listen, we've told you already about being late. And I was like, look, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And she was like, no, well, it won't because you're fired. I was like, right, okay. So it was just mental. After all that, I got fired for being late.
Jeez.
So yeah, that's so anyway, I ended up with that notebook. And that was kind of one of the, I think what had happened there, if I sort of looking at it retrospectively, was that I'd realised that if people believed you were in a position of authority somehow, that they would be a lot more likely to give you information that they otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah. And did you, from that book, how many roughly would you say, like, details you had in there, like card numbers and things?
Oh, I don't know. I've never been asked that question before, Gary. Well done, mate. It's like, I don't know, actually. Maybe like 50 or something like that. Yeah, 50, something. I mean, that is pure guesswork.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I would say something like that.
And from there, did you then just start using those details? Like when you left that call centre, what was the
I left
step?
Well, I left the call centre obviously without a job. I went home and told my parents they weren't happy.
Yeah.
I'd been kind of, usual kind of teenager. I'd been really pissing them off anyway. Staying out late and coming back at all sorts of times in the morning and all that kind of stuff. So they were not particularly happy with me at that point in time anyway. So I had some money, and I thought, right, okay, I'm gonna go somewhere else,
Right.
and basically ended up going down to Manchester, just because I'd heard it was a good place to go, and there was a lot of stuff happening there. So ended up down in Manchester. The money that I had, which I think, if I remember right, was like a few £100 or whatever, ran out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But obviously I had this notebook, and I was like, right, okay, let's see what we can do to put this to work. So essentially, the notebook was, what it allowed me to do was to contact, say you banked with X bank, right? It meant I could contact your bank and pretend to be you.
Yeah.
Right, and I had the details in most cases. Don't get me wrong, sometimes they would throw a curveball with a question I wasn't expecting, but whenever they did that, I took note of that question so I knew for next time.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of the banks were quite clever because obviously the questions that most people would expect to be asked when calling a bank or somewhere else is, things like mother's maiden name. Sometimes there would be passwords set up, whatever, But some of the banks would throw in a question that obviously they had put there because they felt it would not be something that would be expected. So things like, what's your star sign?
Right.
Or can you tell us a street that's close to where you live? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So obviously each time I got one of these questions, I thought, right, okay, I need to take a note of that and make sure that I have the answer to that.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to take any chances, you know. So yeah, obviously when my money started to run out, I was like, okay, started calling banks and seeing about getting cards sent out. The first obstacle that I came up against was that they were wanting to send the card to the cardholder's address. So then I went, okay, well, how do we get around that? So then what I started doing was calling the bank and changing the address.
Right, okay.
So I would call up the bank and say, hi, it's, Mr. So-and-so here, card number, blah, 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 security questions, blah, 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 go through all that. Just to let you know that I'm moving address. Oh, no problem, what's the new address, blah, 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 blah. So they would, they would change the address, and then I would leave it there.
Right.
So I would leave it there for a day or two, and then I would call them back. Because changing address and asking for a new card at the same time might be a bit suspect. So I would call back after a couple of days and say, listen, I've lost my card or my card. In fact, actually, that's not true. What I often said was, instead of saying the card was lost, I would say the card has been damaged. And the reason I did that was because if the card had been lost, they would cancel the existing card, which in turn might, if the original card, if the true card holder had went to use their card and it didn't work,
they might phone in.
Correct.
Right.
So instead of saying that the card was lost or stolen, I would just say, listen, it's just been damaged, it's broken.
Right, okay.
Could you send me a new one? And then they would send it to whatever address I had given them.
Yeah.
So that would usually be, a hotel or wherever I was staying at the time, and they would send it out. But the other thing that I did, so this didn't happen straight away, but initially the cards that I was ordering were in the original cardholder's name. But then one time I was on hold to some bank, and you've got this recorded message, and it's like, did you know you can add an additional cardholder? Could be a friend or family member, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
So then one time I phoned up after hearing that, and I just said, yeah, I'm phoning up to order a card for my nephew. And
Right, okay.
can you guess what his name was? So I ended up ordering cards, and then they would come in my own name.
Right, okay.
And this made things a lot easier because obviously a lot of the places I was using cards was to get cash back and things like that, which was a much bigger a thing than it is now. So I don't even know, a lot of places don't do it now, but
dying art, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it used to be obviously quite a big thing because it meant you could pay for your shopping or whatever you were buying and get some cash back as well to keep you going. With cash.
Yeah.
So usually it was up to £50, but there were places that would do more. But obviously the problem with that was that these places were finite in number, which meant that if I was going into one with a card and, Mr. Smith's name or whatever, then if next time I was in, I used a different card with a different name, and, not everyone's daft that way, and people could pick up on it. So, having something in my own name just made things a lot easier.
Jeez. That's a lot of moving parts as well.
Aye.
When you consider if you're contacting numerous banks and you're getting a new card holder, some you're just changing the address and getting a card sent out. There's so much organisation there from that point of view. But see, at that point, I take it you were fully committed at that point to be like, I'm going to make some major money out of this, or were you still like,
no,
I don't really know what I'm going to do at this point?
I wish I genuinely wish I could sit here and say to you that this was all planned out and that I had a master plan of what was going to happen. I truly did not.
Right.
I was just like living day to day, and I mean, don't be wrong, I had, short-term plans in terms of, right, okay, this day I'm going to do this, and whatever it was that I felt I had to do in order to keep this thing going, but I certainly never had a long-term plan about what was going to be the outcome at the end of this. I mean, I was like, 17?
Yeah.
So, do you know what I mean? It's not something I was really thinking about in that sort of way.
And what kind of things were you then purchasing? But if you had the money, etc., you had the cards, what kind of things were you buying?
So initially, I mean, it really was just about kind of things that teenagers are interested in. So, I've always been massively into music. So that was, I spent a lot of time in HMV, Virgin Mega Stores, all these kind of places that sold music.
Yeah.
I had a CD wallet that held, I think, about 200 CDs that I took everywhere with me.
Right.
So I spent a lot of money on things like CDs and stuff, haircuts, T-shirts, clothes, but cheap stuff. I mean, I don't mean like cheap. I just mean like, standard stuff like Topshop and Next and all that kind of stuff. You know, that was the initial kind of thing. So initially it was kind of that kind of stuff.
And then what changed for that point? When did it go from your everyday, like your CDs, clothes, etc., to like serious money?
Yeah. So I think there was like probably two things that happened that I would say had an effect on that. First one was my first trip to London.
Right.
And how that came about was I discovered, well, I'm trying to think how best to put this in terms of keeping it sort of chronological, kind of. So when the notebook ran out, this was whilst I was still in Manchester, okay? Because obviously, I'm saying to you, I had like maybe 50 sets of information. Not every one of those resulted in a success, okay? So there were ones where, you know, either the person on the phone got suspicious or something else, or I didn't know the answer to a question, or right? So not every one of those was successful. But eventually that information ran out, so I had to kind of think about other ways to get it. And what happened was I was checking into a hotel one day, and there was someone in front of me who was checking in, and I kind of overheard the conversation, gentleman's name and his room number and all that sort of stuff. So rather than wait in the queue, when he moved off, I went away as well and basically found a quiet corner in the lobby somewhere, and called the hotel from my mobile phone, right, and then asked to be put through to that room. Obviously, I'd given it a few minutes so that the guy could get to his room. So when he answered the phone, I just said I was calling from reception. I'm really sorry to bother you, sir. This is quite embarrassing, but unfortunately your card hasn't went through. We've got the bank on the line. They're just asking for some more information just to check that it's really yourself. And he was like, oh, I'm really sorry about that. What do you need to know? So he gave me all the information I asked for. And I mean, I literally went through so much stuff. But the guy was like, oh, no problem. You know, he was obviously a bit embarrassed about it and stuff as well. So I ended up having this full set of information for this guy and his cards and the limits and everything else. And the card that he used was a corporate card.
Right.
So when I contacted the company in question, the Assure, they said that there was, in fact, no limit on that card because it was a charge card.
Right. Okay.
So there was no preset limit on it. So essentially how it would work is, what would happen is, you would use the card for, you know, a certain period of time. They would set probably an initial informal limit, but once you'd shown how you were using the card and how much you were paying for it each month and all the rest of it, then they would usually up that limit and they would allow you to spend a certain amount over that or whatever it was. So it was basically, there was no preset limit on it, but there was potentially a limit on it if they felt you couldn't, if it was a transaction they didn't think you could satisfy. So when I contacted them, what they'd said to me was, there's no preset limit on it, but if you tell us how much you want to spend, we'll be able to tell you whether or not that transaction will pass.
Yeah, it'll flag up.
So I just off the cuff, I said, well, you know, I'm looking to take my entire team away for a conference in Singapore. It's probably going to cost about £45,000. Don't know why I went for such a high number, but I thought, well, you know, let's
at
not,
least you know.
let's not be tame about it, you know. So and she said, oh yeah, that would go through no problem. So I was like, fuck, 45 grand. So, and I said, and then I confirmed with her. I said, so are you telling me that if I just call you before I make this transaction, that you can approve it and make sure it goes through so there's no embarrassment? She said, oh yes, absolutely. She says, just call us, we'll go take you through security. You let us know the value, rough value of the transaction, and we can ensure that it goes through for you. So this was essentially guaranteed success, right? As long as I could get them to believe that I was the card holder. So that opened a whole new...
it's a massive jump.
It was, So from, I think, sometime round about then, and forgive me if I don't have it exactly right in terms of the order of how things happened, but sometime round about that time, I went down to London for probably, I think it was the first time I'd been there, other than passing through when I was a kid. And I ended up in Bond Street, which, as you probably know, is where, like, you know, all the luxury brands are.
High end.
So your Louis Vuittons, Gucci, Prada, blah, blah, blah. And that, I think, was the first time that I had kind of went somewhere where there was that kind of value of items. And I remember, I mean, I probably didn't really look like I fitted in there at the time, you know. So, but I ended up coming away with, the first time I went there, I bought a Gucci belt, which was like 300 quid. and a Louis Vuitton bag, which I think was about 700 or 800 quid, maybe a wee bit more.
Yeah.
I just obviously bought the belt, and I thought, well, I need a bag to put this in. Went to Louis Vuitton, got that, and then came out, and that was the kind of, I think that had been the doors were open at that point, you know. So, and especially knowing that the kind of money that could be spent potentially as well.
What was the biggest you've spent in a single transaction?
A single transaction. So I've been asked this a few times, and I think I'm pretty certain it was the car.
Right.
So this is a bit later on down the line.
Yeah.
I ended up kind of towards the end of this whole thing.
Yep.
I ended up living in Belfast for a while, because like in that sort of, you know, period of time, whatever it was, as I say, 5.5 years, I'd done nothing but travelling.
Right.
And sort of going one place and then making a sharp exit and going somewhere else, and making sure that I was kind of mixing it up a bit.
Yeah.
Because obviously my thinking was, well, the longer I spend in one place, the higher the likelihood of potentially being caught was, you know. So I ended up settling, I say, you know, very, very open, inverted commas, in Belfast. And one day I just got up, I was with one of my pals and obviously trying to impress them for some reason. I was like, yeah, let's go and have a look at cars. So I went to the BMW dealership in Belfast. Now, just to kind of explain a wee bit more about this, I couldn't drive and I didn't have a license, right? So this was just a crazy thing. I mean, there was, you know, when I look back, I was like, what the fuck were you doing, man? What were you fucking doing, mate? Jeez. So went down to the BMW dealership in Belfast, and this young salesman came out, and I was like, yeah, I'm interested in one of those cars, you know. And I'm sure one was a 7 Series, and I think the other one was a 5 Series. I can't remember specifically. But he said, would you like to take it for a spin? And I was like, well, yeah, that sounds good. I was like, do you mind driving? The guy's like, what? And I said, I don't have my license on me. He was like, oh, that's okay, mate, don't worry about it. And I was like, no, really, I'd prefer if you drove. So, I mean, God knows what he was thinking. I really don't know.
He's just wanting a sale.
Who knows, man, honestly. I mean, when I look back at it, it's just bonkers, you know. This, like, what, I would have been 19 or 20 maybe at the time, something like that. You know, walks in and wants to be driven for a test drive. So me and my mate jumped in the back of this car, and we're getting driven around Belfast, and go back to the showroom and placed an order. God knows what I was thinking, because, like, you know, when the car arrived, I wouldn't be able to drive it or whatever. So
how much was the car?
I think it was about 50 grand.
Jeez.
Yeah, I mean that car now would be a lot more.
Yeah.
But we're talking like what, 2000? In fact, 2004. So I would have been a bit older than that. I would have been about 20 or 22, 21, 22, something like that. You know.
And see, from your point of view, when you're in this kind of journey, did you ever have second thoughts when you were doing it, or was there any guilt there? Was there anything that entered your mind like, oh, this is dodgy?
Every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think earlier on I was saying to you about the paranoia aspect of it. It's not a lifestyle. See what happens, Gary, is that a lot of people get in touch with me and they say, oh, it sounds amazing, and can, you know, one of the things I get asked all the time is to give people tips on how to do it, right? Jeez. Which I'll never ever do, because it's for 2 reasons. Number one, no matter what, it boils down to, right, what I did was wrong, right? And I know that. Yeah. Because it was wrong for 2 reasons. Number one, it caused people a lot of stress. Now, I know that the majority of people who were affected by what I'd done would have received their money back, and you know, it probably wouldn't have cost them anything financially. But that experience, from what I know about it now, it's not all about money, you know, and people would have been stressed out, maybe getting a bill in or seeing like this fucking bill for 20 grand. They're like, oh my God, what, you know. So there's that side of things, but also in my life nowadays, I truly do believe that whatever you put out is what you get back. So everything that I had around that time, it wasn't real. Yeah. You know, it was like, even at the time, probably didn't really feel real, because I knew that it wasn't genuine. Like, you know, whatever I'd bought or whatever I was able to do with the money that I had got from what I was doing, it wasn't genuine, you know. And as I said to you earlier on, I think pretty much my whole life was a lie at that time. But people say, you know, oh, sounds amazing, you know, I'd love to do it, and I'm like, well, no, you don't, because you're missing the point here. Yeah. You know, that what I did affected me massively at the time. It affected my family. As I say, it affected the people that I did it to. But it had a lasting effect as well for me.
Yeah.
Because, I came out of prison in 2005. That was the last time I've ever been involved with the police for anything. And you'd think that that's where the story ends in terms of what I did. But it's not, because it affected me for a long time beyond that as well. For, I suppose, in two main ways. Number one is that it really affected my ability to go and get a proper job.
Yeah.
Because when I came out of prison, I decided I was never going to do this again. But then the question at that point is, well, what are you going to do instead? And in terms of like trying to get a job and stuff, it affected me then, but it affected me a long time later as well. I mean, I got a job in 2014. I'd managed, one of my mum's friends had put a good word in for me in 2013, and I got a job working in sales, telesales, advertising, which for some reason I was okay at. I managed to do quite well at it. But that company went into administration, and someone I'd worked with there had moved on to another company and said, look, we're looking for people, why don't you come in and see us? So she arranged an interview, put a word in for me, went in, and I think, according to them at the time, I think I'd beaten like over 100 other candidates to get this one position, which was, at the time, I mean, it was a great position for me. It was, I think, 40 grand a year was the basic, and then on target earnings was like 100 grand. They gave you a car allowance, and it was a great place to work. It was a good company and all the rest of it. And I turned up after having been successful at the application stage, turned up for my first day on the job, went into a board meeting with all the other sales people and the sales director, introduced myself. Everything seemed to be going really well. And then I came out of that meeting. My direct boss gave me some paperwork to look over, some company brochures and all that kind of stuff. And I sat down and started reading through it. And then I was, God, it can't have been any more than about half an hour. And I get called into a meeting with the sales director and my boss. So I'm sitting at one end of this table, which probably was about 3 meters long. The sales director's at the other end, and my boss is sitting next to him. And basically stood up, came over and like put this piece of paper down in front of me, and said, "Is this you?" And what it was so it was a printout of a news story about me that someone had found on the internet. And so obviously I said, "Well, yeah, that's me." He said, "Well, why have you not told us about it?" And I was like, "Well, I don't need to," because by that point, my obligation to tell employers about it had ended through there's a thing called the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, which basically deems that if your sentence is below a certain length of time in prison, that your obligation to tell any employers about it will expire at some point. So at that time that had expired, so I was no longer required to mention it. So I explained all of that, and I think his response was something along the lines of, well, we like to think of ourselves as an open and honest organisation, or whatever other bullshit it was he said,
buzzwords.
And I said, well, I'm really sorry you feel that way, but legally I'm not obliged to mention it, and you've gave me the job, so Anyway, it turned out later, I didn't know this on the day, but they sent me home that day, and told me that they would arrange a meeting for me to come in on the Wednesday, which was I think a couple of days after. And after all this had ended, I'll tell you what else happened in a second, but I found out that basically it was someone who had applied for the job that had worked, another person, not the girl who gave me the interview or set the interview up, someone else who'd wanted the job but didn't get it, had basically printed this off and took it down to the sales director and put it on his desk. So just, I don't know.
As a fuck you.
Basically, for whatever reason. I mean, I know who it was that did it, and I didn't think I had any grievance with this person at all. But obviously they felt that they should have got the job or whatever. Who knows? I mean, honestly, mate, at this point in my life, I do believe that everything does happen for a reason. Even if it's not immediately apparent what that reason is, I think everything happens for a reason, and it's all about how you address the problem as opposed to the problem itself. So. At the time, though, I mean, I can honestly tell you I was heartbroken. That was a really horrible experience, because I just thought, fuck, will this just be something that's just going to affect me for the rest of my days?
Yeah, you'll not get away with it.
So there followed a period after that where I just felt pretty shit, to be honest. And I mean, it all worked out in the end anyway. I got another job after that and so on and so forth. But yeah, they called me back in on the Wednesday. Sorry, I forgot about that part. They called me back on the Wednesday, and HR was there and all the rest of it. And it's funny because a lot of people think HR is a department within the company that's there to protect the employees. It's actually not. It's there to protect the company and stop them from getting sued, you know. So they had basically went through my CV that I'd handed into them in absolutely minute, scrupulous detail, contacted a previous employer and basically found that my date of commencing that employment had been a month out and used that as an excuse to sack me.
Wow.
Yeah, so, I mean, they gave me a month's wages, right? So, you know, it could have been worse. They paid me a month's wages anyway. Probably, that certainly wasn't said at the time, but probably just to put some finality on it and stop me from taking matters further, you know. But aye, so what I'm saying is, when people say to me, you know, it sounds great, right? Aye, okay, maybe you think about all the high points within that, right? All the flying about first class and all that, which, don't get me wrong, I can never deny that was good. It was fun and I did enjoy it. But it was at a very serious cost later, you know.
Yeah, it's the after effects.
Yep.
What about obviously before you went to prison and things, and you're still travelling, you're still spending money, did you have any close calls in respect of being caught?
Loads.
Or did you?
Aye, loads.
Right.
Loads. Aye, fucking loads, man. Aye. Close call central, I would say, you know. So I think, I mean, the one that stands out in my mind, it's just, and I still can't believe that I got away. So what happened was, I was flying from Heathrow to, I think, Manchester, right? Very short flight. You're in there for about 10, 15 minutes and you have to start your descent, right? So, beg your pardon.
Sorry.
Just to maybe set the scene first of all with this, if you can imagine, at the time I was whatever age, 17, 18, 19, whatever, and just a young guy, probably not particularly well dressed in terms of, like, you know, wasn't wearing suits and stuff like that, but I was travelling through Heathrow a lot. And a member of one of the sort of BA team, because I used to fly with BA all the time, that was my preferred airline, and one of the team there was this kind of older guy who I had reason to approach him one day because there was a problem with my flight. I think it had been cancelled or something or whatever, and he just was, for some reason, just didn't like me. And I could see, you know, you can tell from people's body language, you know, maybe, I don't know, he's just seen this, I'm guessing, completely guessing here, but maybe he's seen this, like, young guy travelling first class, and cash, you know, and it's like, who the fuck does this prick think he is, you know? And to be honest, at the time, Gary, you know, I'll hold my hands up, I was an arrogant wee shite, you know, and I do say that quite often to my friends that I know now, that I say to them, like, you know, if you knew me back then, you probably wouldn't have liked me very much, because my social skills were shit, which is part of the problem that I had when I was younger, you know, just like had no real inkling about how to approach social situations in an acceptable way, you know. So I mean, I wouldn't say I was a bad person, but I just, in terms of like dealing with other people, sometimes my attitude was a bit out of place, you know. However, so for some reason I've riled this guy up, and he's obviously seen me a few times and thought, who is this cunt, you know? Excuse my language, sorry, it's maybe a bit strong for your podcast, I apologise. But that's probably what he's thought, you know, who is this guy, you know? So this one particular day, I was on the flight, boarded, sat down, and this announcement, we're kind of basically getting ready to take off or go to the runway, I should say. And this announcement came over the tannoy. It was a pilot saying, listen, I'm really sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but we've got some rogue baggage on the plane. Basically, the passenger hasn't turned up and we need to offload the baggage. Now, just because I was always flying at that time, I
Yeah.
was aware that never happens.
Right.
Because what happens is, if baggage is put, let's say you go to the airport, Gary, you're going to wait Tenerife or something, you put your baggage through the thing at the start of your journey, your hold baggage, your cabin baggage, your hold baggage rather, and let's say for some reason you missed the plane, right, they do not allow your baggage to travel. Because you could have anything in that bag that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So what they would do is they would take that luggage off. So the fact that we'd already started moving told me that this was not correct.
Yeah.
So I knew straight away something was wrong.
And did you think it could be you?
I
or
did,
were you,
yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I did. I did
Right.
think it could be me, yeah. So, yeah, anyway, we kind of stopped at this bit in the airport, almost like, I don't know how to describe it, a wee siding or whatever. The plane came to a standstill. We were waiting for quite a while. And then I looked up and there was 2 cops coming on the plane. So I had a broadsheet newspaper with me at the time. And I don't know if have you ever seen the film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade?
Yep.
Right, so do you remember the part where the Nazis go in the Zeppelin and they're looking for Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, right? So you might remember that he's got a newspaper, right? Like some German newspaper, Die Welt or something like that. And he's like holding it up right in front of him so that they can't see his face. And then the Nazi officer comes over with the truncheon and sort of basically pulls the paper down, right? So I was like, I'll just hold this paper up, it'll protect me. Whatever, I think it was the Financial Times or something like that. I was like, the FT will protect me, you know. But they knew where I was sitting, so it wasn't really so... I wasn't going to get away with that. So they said, like, can you step off the plane with us, please?
Right.
So they took me off the plane, down a set of stairs, into this wee kind of, I don't even know what it was, like a wee bit at the side, a building basically at the side of the runway or whatever. And the BA guy was there.
Oh, the guy that, right,
Yeah,
okay.
so, and he was... he looked really happy.
I was going to say, buzzing.
Aye, he looked really fucking
Right,
happy,
aye.
right? Really pleased with himself. So anyway, this cop, it was just one cop as well. That's the other thing. It wasn't like, so anyway, he was, I think maybe there was 2 at the start, but it was just this one that was talking to me. Sorry, some of the details are a bit fuzzy, but anyway, so he was like asking me about the cards that I'd used to book the flights and stuff. And I was like, look, I haven't done anything wrong. I don't know what this is all about. Just pleading total ignorance to what was going on. And at one point I said, look, I really need to go to the toilet. And he was like, oh, there's a toilet just in there. So I went into the toilet, I was taking a piss, and like he's come into the toilet and he's standing talking to me whilst I'm taking a piss. And he's saying, you know, he said, listen, what do you think your mother would say about all this and all that kind of stuff? Obviously trying to get me to fess up, right? And it got to a point where I was like, they don't fucking know anything. Like, this is just, he's just said, I think there's something wrong here. So I was like, right. And it was just the way he was questioning me just gave me the knowledge that they didn't know. They didn't have anything, basically. So we came back out of this toilet bit and I was like, look, I don't know what you're talking about. This flight was booked legitimately, blah, blah, blah. So eventually he was like, right, okay. He says, well, you're free to go. The BA guy was fucking raging. I could see his face. He was absolutely beeling. And then, so he came over to me and he was like, oh, Mr. Castro, I'm really sorry about this, but here's a voucher to go and stay in the Renaissance Hotel at the airport on us tonight. We'll get you on the first flight in the morning. I'm really sorry for any inconvenience, you know. And I was like, all right, no problem, thanks. But I knew he was talking shit, right? Because people just, sometimes they give the game away, right? So, so I had this voucher to go and stay in the Renaissance Hotel, but I didn't go. Because I was like, this is dodgy. So, and he, as I say, kind of gave the game away. So I went into London and stayed with my friend instead. I just phoned him up and said, would you mind? Of course, no problem. So I went and stayed with him. And then I think the next day I just got the train up to Manchester or something. But years later, so when all this came to an end, I found out that what had actually happened was that at 4 o'clock the following morning, the detective from Heathrow, who had been on my case, basically, who'd been kind of chasing me, found out from this BA guy that I was staying in that hotel. So they've raced to the hotel, and I wasn't there. So that was a close call.
And see then, did you know this detective was on your case at that point?
Not at that exact moment, no. I didn't find that out till later.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I didn't know anything about that, you know. Because if I'd known that, I wouldn't have been travelling out of Heathrow. because that's where he was based, you know. And once I did find out, I stayed away from Heathrow.
And even at that point, were you still like pressing on with what you were doing? Even then, were you still like, I need to stop? Or were you? Where was your mind at then?
At that point in time, I mean, I was just still up for the cup.
Just fully confident that you weren't going to get caught.
I didn't believe that I would ever be caught. Jeez. And do you know what's funny? Because as soon as that belief disappeared, I did get caught. Do you know what I mean?
So how did you actually get caught? Was it that detective?
Yeah, so essentially it was yeah, so it was quite mental actually. I mean, right, so how do I kind of set the scene for this, right? So basically, I had been arrested a couple of times here and there, right, throughout this whole period of time, but it was always for something quite small.
Right.
So they would maybe fine me with a card on me, or like, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't really, in Glasgow, I was too well known amongst the cops. Do you know what I mean? Because I'd been nicked so many times. But the thing is, although I'd been arrested a few times, it was never apparent that the scale of what I was doing.
Yep.
So I would have like maybe one card on me, or sometimes no cards.
Yeah.
Like if it was in a hotel or something like that. So I would get arrested, but then part of the problem that the police had was because I got arrested so many times, but the charges were never laid a lot of the time.
Right.
And part of the reason for that, which I didn't fully understand at the time, but I know a lot more about it now, was because the banks really didn't give a shit.
Right.
I'm not saying they didn't care completely, but they were more concerned with their reputation than publicising someone who was able to
get the better of
take them to the cleaners, basically. So that was part, and I found out later from sort of various police officers and procurators fiscal and prosecutors down in England and stuff like that, just from over the last 15 years, just conversations that have been had from people who were involved, saying that, you know, the trouble they had getting information off the banks was just diabolical, to the point where charges couldn't successfully be laid because they just didn't have the proof, you know. That was obviously in my favour, you know. So yeah, I did get arrested. I wasn't perfect at it. I got arrested quite a few times.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of those times were when I'd been drinking, and I took stupid risks because I'd been drinking. Like there was one time I was staying in Manchester in a hotel down there. I came back after a night out, absolutely paralytic. Went to go up to my room, ended up in the restaurant area, which was closed at the time, but they had a card machine sitting there, and basically refunded £2,500 onto my own debit card. And then woke up the next morning with the cops at the door. So yeah, things like that, just stupid mistakes, you know. It's amazing when drink's involved how it changes your thinking.
Overconfidence with alcohol.
Absolutely. Like that's a polite way of putting it, yeah. So yeah.
Wow. And what was the turning point then? When did you actually get caught and you thought you knew that game was up?
Right, okay. So basically what had happened, I had been to Canada a couple of times. The first time I went to Canada, I had one of these close calls, as you said earlier on, which I'll never know.
Yeah. Was it
a close call or was it just me overthinking things? But I used to have a wee sort of thing that I would do when I would come back to my hotel room. Instead of just walking straight into the room, I would always knock the door first, and I would say housekeeping,
right,
just to see if there was anyone in the room. So this one time I came back to the hotel. This was like, I think the first time I went to Canada, and I didn't knock the door, but I heard walkie-talkies inside.
Right.
And I thought, shit, okay, because I mean, obviously, if I'd been thinking about it a bit clearer, I might have thought, well, it could just be housekeeping, because sometimes they do have walkie-talkies. But I heard a walkie-talkie going off. It didn't sound good, and I made a dash for the exit.
Right.
And basically ran down the stairs at the back of the hotel, through the kitchen. There's like chefs running about with plates and ran out the back door of the hotel, managed to somehow miraculously find where that was, and basically ran out in a sweat, and there's like this guy sitting not far from the exit, in his car, like a wee kind of old guy, and I just went up and flashed my wallet and I said, "Hey, Canadian Secret Service, we need to commandeer your vehicle." So the guy was like, "Oh," he's just like, "Yeah, no problem, you know, this guy." So anyway, I jumped in the car. He was like happy to help, you know. He had been in the Canadian Armed Forces. I think he said he was in the army, so he'd been in the Canadian Armed Forces. So he was like, "Oh, I'm just happy to help, you know, blah, blah, blah," and kept, you know, trying to ask what it was about. And I was like, "I can't talk about that. I'm sorry, it's secret, blah, blah, blah." So I told him to take me to the airport in Toronto. And as we're approaching, I'll never forget it, as we're approaching the sort of airport area, he was like, "You know, do you want me to take you to the police station in the airport?" And I was like, nah, it's fine. Just the terminal will do, you know. So that happened. And then the second time I went to Canada, so by this point I had been arrested in Ireland. I'd become aware that one of the travel companies that I was using, which was a company called Expedia, I became aware that they had been in touch with the police in Ireland because I had been staying there and had been involved. So I'd basically bought a ticket for someone that I knew for their mum. Now the whole circumstance around that was probably one of the stupidest things that I'd ever done, really, because they didn't have a credit card, so they wanted me to book a flight for them, and they believed that I was quite wealthy and had lots of money and stuff, and everybody knew that I had credit cards, so they were like, "Can you book this flight?" So I booked a flight for his mum. Now normally if I booked a flight, I would be booking a flight for that same day or the next day, because I didn't want too much time to be there for things to be discovered. But stupidly, I booked this flight for them, which was due to leave in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. And then what happened was, in that intervening period, someone had reported it and it had been investigated. So when his mum turned up to the airport, they were there to arrest her at the gate. So that I mean, that's, to me, that's fucking horrendous. Like, you know, I'm just like, even now thinking about it, I feel incredibly guilty about that, because, you know, I've caused that to happen, you know, inadvertently, but still as a result of what I was doing, you know. So that had then brought me to the attention of the Irish police. They had then spoke to Expedia. Expedia said, "Yes, this guy's been a problem for some time, booking first-class flights here, there and everywhere," and they were getting charged back by the card companies because that was how things worked. So essentially, the net was closing in, basically. You know, that was the bottom line. So the second time I went to Canada, Expedia had put a marker on their system. Now, I suspected that they might do that, i.e. a marker looking for my name, right? Sadly, my name is Elliot Castro, so it's not John Smith or something like that. Unfortunately, might have made things a wee bit easier had it been. So what I did instead was, instead of putting my name as Elliot Castro, I would kind of like mix it up a bit. And then when I would arrive somewhere, I would just say, "Oh yeah, they must have got my name wrong." But it would be close enough that you could, you know what I mean? So instead of Elliot Castro, it would be like Elliot Castro with a W at the end or something like that. You know? And I believed that that would circumvent any potential checks that they were doing, you know, or searches for my name or whatever. So the second time I went to Canada, or was it the third? I can't remember. But anyway, the last time I went, basically, checked into this hotel. Everything seemed cool. I'd booked it through Expedia, blah, blah, blah. Everything was fine. And went up to the room, went out shopping, came back. And this time I didn't do my housekeeping thing. So just put the key to the door and walked straight in. And the minute I walked in, I got my hands put behind my back and cuffs put on, and taken down to Toronto City Police Station or whatever it was called. And there was, they weren't believing any of my bullshit, so I wasn't. The other thing as well was that my passport had been taken off me in Ireland, so I'd had to get a new one. Which I did, but they believed that I was travelling on a forged passport because they'd been told by the Irish police, "Listen, we've got his passport." So they obviously thought I was travelling on fake documents, which I wasn't. But that's you know, quite a serious thing, obviously. You know, so they were like, "Nah, this guy's definitely not going anywhere." So I ended up getting like I was in jail there for 3 months, and when it came to being released, The jail that I was in was a jail called the Don Jail in Toronto, and it was notorious for having extremely poor conditions, to the point where prisoners that had been held there were being given 3 days to 1 credit for each day that they'd spent inside,
Right.
because the conditions were so poor.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a fucking hellhole.
Yeah.
You know, there's no doubt about that. So anyway, I got to the point where I was sentenced, and I was given a year's sentence, but I'd already spent enough time to be time served, basically. But I was also sentenced. When I was sentenced, I was ordered to be deported from Canada.
Yep.
Right. So, obviously, after your sentence, you just want to think, right, well, when the fuck am I getting out of here? So I phoned up the Canadian immigration people from the jail and said, yeah, look, I'm supposed to be getting deported. Can you tell me when that's likely to happen? And they wouldn't tell me a thing, because for security reasons, obviously they don't want to, let the prisoner know. So I was like, right, okay, cool. So then I went away and thought about it, and then went back to the phone like a couple of days later, or might have even been the next day, I don't know. Phoned back, and instead of phoning as myself, I phoned up and I pretended to be from the British Embassy.
Right.
So I said, yeah, it's whoever from the British Embassy. We're just calling in relation to Mr. Castro. He's being held with you at the moment. We've had his family who are quite concerned. They'd just like to know when he's being returned to the UK.
Yeah.
And the guy at the other end, the immigration guy, was like, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Mr. Castro, he's going out on Monday. And then he hesitated and he said, oh, yeah, we've been asked to contact Detective Ralph Eastgate at Heathrow Airport to let him know when he's being returned. And I just off the cuff, I said, oh, don't worry about that. The embassy will take care of that for you. Ralph Eastgate, you said. He said, oh, yeah, that's great. That's one less thing for me to do. I was like... So then came probably the longest few days of my life, right? Not knowing whether that had been successful or not. Do you know what I mean? And there was no way for me to check, Like,
you wouldn't know until...
Nah, I just wouldn't know. So the day of my deportation, they took me to the airport, put me on the flight, and they gave me this like beige official Government of Canada envelope. Well, they didn't give it to me. They gave it to the head guy on the plane, the cabin crew. And this, what was supposed to happen was, when the flight landed, he was supposed to sort of take me to border control and say, look, this guy's been deported, blah, blah, blah. But throughout the flight, the guy had come over and spoke to me. He said, what happened? And, he's just, and I was like, listen, you know what? I got a bit drunk, ended up in a fight. He's like, that could happen to anyone, blah, blah, blah. So when we landed, he just handed me the envelope and said, best of luck, mate, So I was like, oh, right, okay. So, I mean, but honestly, even at this point, I still did not know for sure.
Yeah.
Right? So got off the plane, walking towards the border control. I'd obviously put this envelope thing away and just took my passport out,
Yeah.
Passed my passport over, and it was like a tense moment, and the guy looked up and looked back at the passport, looked up again, and he smiled and went, welcome home, sir. Handed me my passport. I was like, but even then, I still wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Like, were they waiting for me further up the way or what, So jeez. I was just like, I need to get the fuck out of this airport right now. Now, bear in mind, obviously, Gary, they had taken all my cash off me as proceeds of crime. I had no cards. I had nothing, right?
Yeah.
But when I looked through the envelope, what I found was the plane ticket that they had sent me back to the UK on. And at the bottom of the plane ticket was the full credit card number that they had used to book the flight. So I was like, okay, I need to get home to Glasgow. I couldn't really ask my parents to pay for it because they were probably not very happy with me at the time. So I phoned up and booked a flight on that.
On that credit card?
Yeah.
Jesus wept, man.
So, yeah.
That's bold.
Just had to get home,
Fucking hell.
I think it was just a case of trying to find a way whenever possible. So that was... so at this point, obviously, things were beginning to unravel a wee bit, And that's where, around about the same time, I ended up in Belfast.
Right.
And I'd met some sort of quite famous DJs in Glasgow one night. I was staying at a hotel there one night and came back after the night out and bumped into these guys who were DJing. I'd always been quite into my music and stuff. Got on really well with them, and they were like, why don't you come and visit us in Belfast? So I did. I had a great time. Ended up getting a flat. I rented a flat there for a while.
Right.
And I was I think this was me probably kind of starting to realise that I wasn't enjoying it anymore.
Yeah.
Like all the constant being on the run and lying to people and all that kind of stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still had to tell a lot of fibs about how I was achieving the lifestyle that I was having at the time. And actually, that's kind of what made it really hard, because I think for someone who had went through the majority of their childhood and teenage years without many friends, in fact, I would say probably most times completely devoid of friendship. When I started to meet people that I did get on with, having to lie to them about things was pretty difficult and painful. You know, I mean, since all this has ended, I've kind of kept in touch with a couple of people who I would say, you know, are really good friends, because you know they've accepted everything that's happened and still want to be my friend. You know, which is, I think it says a lot about them. But I'd actually forgotten about this. I caught up with one of them recently. So one of my friends, Lee, who was in the documentary, he sort of gave a wee bit of information for the documentary, and I spoke to him recently, and he was saying, you know, I don't know if you remember this, but there was one time we came back after being out one night, you know, and you were really upset and you were crying and you were going to tell us something, but then you didn't tell us.
So what was that then, maybe?
Oh, I think so, yeah. I think I was very close to saying, you know. But obviously I didn't.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just so much to keep to yourself.
I was going to ask, what was your family's position on it? Did they know, or did they have any idea what was going on?
I think they might have had a clue when the cops kept turning up at the door to search the house and stuff like that. They might have had some inkling at that point. But yeah, they didn't. I don't think they knew the full extent of it. You know, I mean, I've always been a mummy's boy, you know. Sadly, my mum passed away a couple of years ago, but she certainly kind of knew what was going on, you know. But she's never going to help the cops find her son, you know. So it's a typical thing that mums do, isn't it, you know. So, but yeah, I mean, I think I had a lot of apologising to do to my family, because I think it really affected them as well. Just, I mean, you know, can you imagine your son being in a prison 4,000 miles away?
A horrendous prison at that.
Exactly. So, you know, I've obviously put them through a lot of hard times as well. So yeah, I mean, in terms of family and stuff, I mean, that was probably one of the hardest things for me as well. Really, it was just being away from them for so long as well. And obviously, part of my problem was that once I become aware that I was being looked for, it wasn't really a thing for me to do. It was to come home and stuff, you know. So quite often I would maybe phone my mum and say, right, I've booked you a flight down to London, and stuff like that. So she would come down and meet me in London, and you know, whatever. But yeah, certainly, you know, towards the end, it became a lot more difficult emotionally to maintain the disguise. You know, because you can't, like, true friendships are not based on lies. You know, and at that time, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of people who were around me who were not true friends. You know, no offense to them. You know, that's just the way people are sometimes. You know, they saw the lifestyle, and you know, I would walk into bars and buy everyone champagne, or you know, drinks are on me tonight, and you know, pay a bill like 3, 4, 5 grand at the end of the night for everyone's drinks. You know, just mental stuff. You always attract those kind of friends in that situation as well, don't you? Of course. I mean, but I mean, that was an important lesson for me to learn. You know, that money doesn't always attract the attention that you really seek. You know, and then quite often it attracts the wrong attention. But that was a lesson that I had to learn, you know. Did you ever hear anything else for that detective? Yeah, so he's the one that finally arrested me, Jeez. So basically what happened, right, so as I say, I came back to Glasgow, ended up in Belfast, and I was there for about 11 months, nearly almost a full year in Belfast. And one of my friends, I'd said to him, look, you know, why don't we go away for a couple of days? I'll pay for it, you know, no problem. So booked flights out to Amsterdam. The plan was we were going to go over to Amsterdam and do whatever you do in Amsterdam. Don't think I need to say any more than that. So yeah, went to Amsterdam, booked flights to Amsterdam, and then on the morning we were supposed to be travelling, I had another thing that I would do before I went anywhere, which was I would call the airline. So I would call up and say, like, you know, I'm phone BA from I would say I'm phoning from their desk at whatever airport, and I would just say, listen, our systems are down at the moment. Could you check this booking for me, please?
Right.
And they'd be, yeah, no problem. What's the booking number? So I'd give them the booking reference. But on this one particular occasion, he said, oh, I'm really sorry, but there's a potential fraud marker on that booking. Is the passenger there? I was like, well, he's just popped off just now. He said, all right, okay, well, you might want to alert security. And I was like, okay, I'll go and let them know straight away. Thanks. Came off the phone, right? And I was like, okay, well, my mate was in the house at the time. I went next door, I said, listen, we can't go to Amsterdam. And I can't remember what reason I gave, but it was the most unbelievable bullshit excuse why we couldn't go. And so I felt terrible because we'd been looking forward to this. And I was like, don't worry, we'll go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So we ended up booking flights to another glamorous destination, Edinburgh.
No difference.
Yeah, none whatsoever. Hey, it's got a castle.
Yeah, true. Aye.
So he was fine with that. We went to a different airport. So there's 2 airports in Belfast. I don't know if you know that. I think the flights we were supposed to be taking were out of international. These flights were out of city, so I was like, I'm not going to the same airport, right? Yeah. So we got on flights to Edinburgh from city, checked into, there's a hotel in Edinburgh called the Glass House, which I don't know what sort of standing it's got nowadays, but at the time it was, brand new, very much the place to go kind of thing. And I'd stayed there previously. So just on that previous stay, actually, just because it's part of the story, the last time I'd stayed there, I'd went out to a jeweller's on George Street and bought a £12,500 Rolex, solid gold Rolex. Took it back to the hotel, and basically I had a habit. So just from previous bad experiences, I always got rid of any receipts. The minute I left the shop, the receipt would go in the bin.
Right.
But this one occasion, I bought the watch, and when I got back to the hotel, I just put the receipt in the bin in the hotel.
Okay.
So I'll come back to that after, right? So we checked in, no issues, went to bed that night, had a shower in the morning, got ready to go out. And because I didn't want my friends seeing me using the card, for this one occasion I had a card which was in the other person's name. I can't remember what the reason for that was, but it wasn't in my name. So I went to Harvey Nicks, which was just a few minutes walk from the hotel. Went to the customer service desk, and the lady was there, said, can I have £2,000 of gift vouchers? Which is quite a lot, even now, but back then it was probably even more so. So she was like, I passed over the American Express card, and she said, have you got any ID? And I was like, oh, listen, don't worry about ID, it's fine. And I was so cocky about the whole fucking thing, right? I was like, listen, it's cool. Call Amex, they'll tell you everything's cool, blah, blah, blah. So she did. Amex came on the phone, answered all the questions. Obviously, I knew all the answers. And she was like, okay, cool, handed me the vouchers, and I went back to the hotel to get my mate. So probably less than an hour later, went back to the shop with my mate this time. The menswear manager was there, who I always used to talk to when I went in. He was like, nice to see you. Let's have a look round and stuff. I was like, oh, somebody got me gift vouchers, blah, blah, blah. He said, oh, cool, well, let's see. So I went round and was like, I'll try on that, try that, try that. So that was how it used to work. I'd go in and say, right, I like that, I'll try that, try that, try that. And then basically there would be like this whole pile of clothing waiting for me at the changing rooms. I'd go in, try everything on, choose what I was taking, and blah, blah, blah. Halfway round the shop, I needed to go to the loo, and I said, excuse me, man, I'm just going to go to the toilet. So I went to the toilet in the menswear department, and then as I went to open the door of the cubicle to come out, this guy was standing right in front of me, grabbed my wrist, and he was like, we need to have a word with you. So there was no talking myself out of that situation, because I think I had about 4 or 5 different identities in my wallet.
Right.
So you can only have so many fucking uncles. Do you know what I mean? So so that wasn't going to wash. But what had happened was that the customer service lady had, when I'd walked away, she just knew something wasn't right.
Right.
She just had this gut feeling that there was something off about this whole situation. So when I left, she immediately picked up the phone and called American Express again and said, listen, something's not right with this. Can you just double check this for me, please? So they've then went and called the card holder at his work.
Right.
Got a hold of the guy, And he said, no, first of all, I haven't moved address, and secondly, I haven't just bought £2,000 of gift vouchers from Harvey Nicks. So obviously, she's immediately called the cops or whatever. And because I went back to the shop less than an hour later to spend the vouchers that I'd just fraudulently purchased. I mean, places, by the way, places like Harvey Nicks and Selfridges and high-end shops like that, they have really good security.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So they don't fuck about with stuff like that, because you're talking, I mean, you walk in there, you know, a jumper could cost you £2,000. You know,
there's reputation for them as
of
well,
course.
isn't it?
Yeah, but there's such high value items that they need to protect their stock, you know. So my mate was sitting there. He was, you know, sitting on a wee sofa thing, and only a couple of weeks earlier, he'd asked me. He said, "Look, Elliot, you know, I've heard a couple of people saying that, you know, you may be up to something dodgy, blah blah." I was like, "No, man, not at all. No way, you know." So he was obviously sitting there, having been, you know,
like, what the fuck's happening here?
and he looked at me, and he just, I'll never forget his face. He looked at me in the most disappointed face ever, and just shook his head, and that will never leave me.
Yeah.
You know. So I got taken down to the cop shop. The watch that I'd bought the previous time, I had it on my wrist at the time. So when they took all my stuff off me, they took the watch off, and they're like, "Oh, it's a nice watch. Where did you get that?" And I was like, just so much bullshit, man. The first thing that came into my head was, I bought it at an auction in Boston, Massachusetts. Boston, never even fucking been to Boston. I have no idea where this came from. Jeez. But that was basically what I told them. Now, unfortunately for me,
you kept the receipt.
The hotel had found the receipt in the bin, thought that I might need it because it was for a £12,500 fucking watch, and kept the receipt aside for me for the next time I was at the hotel. So when the cops went back to the hotel, they've said, "Oh yeah, actually, you know, we've got this receipt that we meant to give him from the last time he was here." So, yeah, that basically ended up being the proof that they needed. Now, just to kind of explain what happened, so even that wasn't the end, right? It was almost the end, but it wasn't. It was such a protracted ending to this that I still can't sometimes believe that the way it went, right? So I got charged with fraud and all the rest of it at Gayfield Square Police Station. They took me up to Saughton, which is the main prison in Edinburgh, and I was there for like just about 2 weeks. My lawyer in that intervening period had discovered that there had been some errors in the chain of custody, and basically they had fucked up something. Right. So they had to let me go.
After they were over the moon.
After 2 weeks, right? So I'd spent 2 weeks in Saughton, and then I got told that I was being released. And I was like, "You are fucking kidding me." I was like, "I can't believe this." So they took me down to the reception, got all my belongings together, and I was just ready to walk out the door when there's like 2 other cops standing there. And I was like, "What's this?" They said, "Oh yeah, we've got a warrant for you in Manchester." So this warrant was regarding a probation order that had been given on a previous occasion that I hadn't fulfilled. So I got taken down to Manchester, put in the cells overnight, taken to court there the next day. They appointed a duty lawyer, and this guy was terrible. I mean, really, really bad, stuttering and not giving my case properly at all. So anyway, I called him over. So obviously I'm in the dock. I called him over and I said, "Listen, can I speak to them for a minute?" He said, "Oh, they don't normally let." I said, "Well, can you just ask, please?" So he was like, "Right, okay." So he spoke to the magistrates and they said, "Right, what is it you want to say, Mr. Castro?" And I was like, "Well, look," and I was just poured my heart out. I was like, "Listen, I understand I didn't fulfill this order." I said, "I'm really sorry. I live in Glasgow. It was a long way to come, blah, blah, blah. I've got a new job. I'm doing well. I've turned my life around, blah, just whatever bullshit I could think of." So then the magistrates went away into the back room where they make their decisions, came back out, and the magistrates, so in England you get like a panel of magistrates which are lay magistrates. So they're not lawyers, they're not judges, they're just advised by a legal assistant who's there. Or the other side is that you get a stipendiary magistrate, which is just a single person who's a lawyer or a judge. Anyway, so a panel of 3, they went back, had their discussion, came through, and the lady who was the head magistrate told me to stand up. So I stood up and she said, Well, it would seem as though the gods are shining upon you today, Mr. Castro. We accept what you've said, and we're going to give you a £50 fine and let you go. And so I'm like that. Just can't believe this, you know. I'm like, how do I keep getting away with this, you know? So back downstairs to the cells, because they've got to do paperwork and stuff before they let you go. So collected all my belongings, and then as I'm just way to leave, there's another 2 cops there. This time to take me down to London. Jeez. So I'm like, fucking hell, right? So got down to London, and I thought, well, it'd be third time lucky. So anyway, got down to London, and this cop walks into the cell. This is Eastgate at this point.
Oh, right, okay.
So he's like that. Been looking for you for some time, Mr. Castro. Nice to meet you. And I stood up. Now I didn't know this. So I stood up, and then he walked out and locked the door.
Right.
And I was like, the fuck's that all about? But he'd went to ask if that was definitely me, because he couldn't believe how young I was. Right, he's expecting some like mature,
career criminal,
powerful, kind of, you know. And I'm just like a not a teenager quite, but almost, you know, almost still a teenager. So then he came in again. He's like, "So what is you?" I was like, "It's definitely me." I was like, "Right, okay." He says, "Well," he said, "I think you know this is where this is going." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." So, I mean, obviously they had me banged to rights, you know, for various different crimes and things. I mean, it's funny because although he had been chasing me, and although he was the one who caught me, and although he was, you know, the one who put me in a position where I was in court and got sentenced to prison time and all the rest of it, as far as like having respect for a police officer, I have to say, you know, he's passed away now, sadly, but, you know, he treated me with the utmost respect. Went and bought me fags, bought me a book to read in the cells, and you know, just all that kind of stuff. And you know, I can't say anything bad about the guy at all. It was his last case as well, so he was part of the flying squad and all that like years ago. So this was his last case before he retired.
Right.
So I think he was just happy to crack it. Jeez. You know. So then from there ended up in court. I don't know how this happened either, but I only got 2 years. I was expecting so much longer. But my mum had written a letter to the court as well, you know, pleading for leniency and all that kind of stuff. So I think there was a few things that sort of helped a wee bit with that, you know. And that's it really. So that's when it all kind of ended.
Jeez. How do you look back on it? Like, see, when you're with the benefit of hindsight now, and obviously it's considerably some time ago, but how do you look back on it now, at that period?
It's sometimes hard to believe it's the same person.
Yeah.
You know, because my way of thinking now is totally different. I think one of the things back then that was one of the reasons why I just kept doing it was because I didn't really feel that I had anything to lose. Yeah. You know, I mean, I certainly don't say that with the expectation that anyone feels sorry for me, you know, but the life I had at the time was completely different to what most people were living at that point in their lives. But yeah, I mean, sometimes when I'm talking about it and I think about some of the things that I did, I genuinely, as I said a minute ago, find it hard to believe sometimes that it's the same person. Yeah. Because just really crazy things, you know, like ballsy as well. Yeah. To the point of just, I guess, maybe having like zero concern for any consequences, you know, just like, fuck it, kind of attitude, you know. I mean, having said that, obviously, a lot of the things that I did are things that many people will get a chance to experience in their life. So, you know, like flying Concorde and staying in like, I don't know, any number of high-end hotels that I stayed in, you know, where like maybe your room's costing like 10 grand a night and stuff like that. You know, so I've had the experiences that a lot of people will never have, you know, and I'm grateful for that. I'm not sure whether gratitude's maybe the right emotion to describe it, but at this point it's kind of, I always think now, right, okay, what lessons did I learn from that? Yeah. And I mean, I think in many ways, although a lot of people say, well, you must have been really smart and all the rest of it, if I'd used that for something else, then my life could have been very different.
Yeah.
So there are times where I do wonder, you know, what could have been if I hadn't went down that avenue. But I think I'm past the point of regret now, because I just feel that I'm not really going to I'm not going to allow myself to spend the rest of my life regretting what I did when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
You know, because we can't change the past. It's happened. There's a lot of things that I did that I regret. Some things, you know, I regret more than others. But the way I see it now, you know, 20 years after it all came crashing down, is what can I take from what I did that can allow me to help other people?
Yeah.
That's probably one of the things that I'm most focused on just now is what can I do with my experiences to help other people, you know, who might be in a position or a situation where they are feeling a bit lost or not. I mean, I'm not talking specifically, by the way, about people who are involved in crime. I'm just talking about people who are maybe feeling that they don't know what they're doing with their lives.
Yeah.
Because I certainly didn't, you know, at that time. And I feel that if I'd had maybe some people around me who could give me better advice, that I might have not ended up going down that path.
Yeah.
I mean, I might have done, you know, I can't say for certain.
Hard
but
to predict.
It is, you can't say, oh, well, if this, then this, blah, blah. You know, it's life's not like that.
Yeah.
So now I'm in this, and at this point in time, I'm kind of focused on really trying to work out what I can do to help other people, because obviously my experiences. I mean, I don't find my story personal. I don't sit down and say, "Oh my God, that's a really interesting story," because it's my story. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's just I totally understand why people find it interesting. Like I totally get it, and I understand why it's interesting to people. But really, for me now, it's about what can I use from my experiences that can maybe assist someone else to make better decisions in their own lives.
Yeah.
You know, having come through everything that I've come through, the good, the bad, and you know, now, as I say, nearly 20 years down the line, everything that I've learned in that intervening period as well. So, you know, that's kind of what I want to do. I've been very fortunate recently. I've been asked to sit on the board of a charity based in North Lanarkshire, which I've not decided yet, but I'm considering it.
Yeah.
I've been giving like some talks to young people who are in one way or another experiencing some difficulties in their lives, whether that be through problems at school, problems at home, sometimes a combination of both.
Yeah.
Just trying to help these young people look at their lives in a way where they can see that there's some hope and light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of our young people, and it probably has been this way for a long time, but certainly from what I've seen, a lot of our young people at this point in time are struggling to find a path for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, they just feel like the world hasn't really got anything to offer for one reason or another. So, and I think that's one thing that I would like to try and help people avoid. Because I think when you feel like that, that's when you start searching for things that might not be
100%.
You know, good for you in the long term.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. You know,
This episode has piqued my interest, but more for the sense of your experience, but also the way you talk about the aftermath of it and the things that have affected you since then, because I think it's important for people who do message you and go, it's a brilliant story. Yeah, it is, but there's consequences in that as well. You're still feeling the effects of those consequences, but no, it's been educational to see the people won't look at the good things with stuff like this, like, oh, spending loads of money and all that, but there's so many other pitfalls that come at the time and X amount of years later. But I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing.
Problem.
It's been
no worries.
It's been brilliant.
No, it's always quite cathartic for me as well to talk about it, if I'm totally honest with you. I don't know, just going through it again and maybe just kind of giving myself a wee invisible pat on the back sometimes for thinking, right, okay, you know, I could have still been in jail or something like that, you know. But I think once you've made that decision, and I think that really is sometimes the hard thing for people to do, because I mean, if you think about people who are involved in crime of some sort, particularly where there's a financial gain for them, it can be difficult for those people to see another way. I had a conversation recently with a guy who is involved with another charity, and he deals with like young people who are just coming out of prison and stuff. And you know, it's a choice for these people sometimes between he can easily, like, say for example, get them a job in McDonald's or something. But then for that person, it's a choice of, well, do I go and work at McDonald's for £300 a week, or do I punt green for £600 a week? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So there needs to be more help available, I think, for people coming out of prison, because the bottom line is, Gary, that I understand that there's a certain type of person in society who thinks that criminals should just be locked up and you know, the key thrown away, etc. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't solve the problem. You know, right now people come out of prison and they're given a ticket to get home, whatever 30, 40 quid, or I don't know how much it is these days, whatever discharge grant they're given, and they're just basically sent on their way and told to go and see a probation officer. Now, for the majority of people, that's not going to be sufficient to help change their ways, you know. So one of the things that I'm really interested in at the moment is trying to find different ways of doing things that could change things for people coming out of prison, because the bottom line is, if people come out of prison and don't reoffend, then society as a whole benefits from that. You know, everyone's a winner. There's no losers in that situation. But the current way things are done isn't working, and we're seeing that just now as well with the number of people who are locked up, and the fact that there's no space in jail, and they're having to let people go who've in some cases committed really horrendous crimes. So, you know, I think one of the things that I just want to do is try and find out if there's a better way of doing all that as well, you know. Sorry, I'm just waffling.
No,
now.
mate, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed the episode, and I think people will take a lot from it as well.
I hope so. Yeah.
Love it.
Thanks for having me on.
No, mate, thank you.
We got there in the end.
Yeah, mate.